Yeah, well, so I do believe that the helium business is going through some significant structural changes. They're starting to see some significant structural changes right now. The five or six helium majors, depending on how you define a major, they're still have very strong positions compared to everybody else. But what we're saying is that increasingly the smaller gas companies, the tier two, tier three gas companies, are buying their own helium containers and gaining direct access to supply. So there's several reasons for that. Well, first of all, during the shortages, uh, I think the tier two and tier three gas companies felt they were being taken advantage of unfairly by the helium majors. I mean, they were absorbing very large price increases from the majors. They were subject to allocations, and many of them decided that it wasn't a good deal. I'm going to buy my own containers and try to cut out the middleman. So that's one of the things that's been going on is that a lot of the smaller companies have been, trying to go direct to the producers. Large producers like ExxonMobil have been more willing to sell to smaller gas companies. In the past, they were, let's say, reluctant to sell to smaller companies because of concerns about credit risk and things like that. But they've gotten over that, and increasingly, they are selling to the smaller companies. Gazprom has certainly made supply available to smaller gas companies due to the termination of their agreements with Air Products and Linde. So they had a sizable amount of helium to sell, and they had to sell it to folks who have the capability to buy it and who aren't constrained by sanctions. So that's been out there. And then the last thing I'd mention is that there's all of these helium exploration startups now, that around close to 60 of them by my count, and they are uh, much more willing to sell to a tier two or tier three gas company. Basically, they sell to whoever offers them the highest price with without with a reputation for honoring their agreements. So that's a pretty a pretty big thing. The helium business is still a strong oligopoly, but I would definitely say that the oligopoly is beginning to fray around the edges a little bit. Um, Another thing that I would mention, second big thing, is that the U.S. is still the largest producer of helium. We are Qatar is gaining on the U.S. Qatar could even surpass the U.S. When Qatar 4 reaches full capacity, depending on what goes on in the U.S., because there are some supply initiatives in the U.S. There's a quite large project in Wyoming that a company called Blue Spruce is trying to develop. Uh, if that comes to fruition, the U.S. might stay in the lead for longer. But it's becoming less of a U.S. centric business, and there's, I guess I would say the business is becoming a little more regional, where it's kind of like the Asian countries, primarily, that are able to buy Russian helium, which has been offered to the market at pretty attractive cost. Uh, and those countries are have relatively simple logistics from Russia. You can go overland from Russia to China now. Uh, that the business feels like it's becoming certain countries that are kind of revolving around Russia, and then the rest of the world that is everybody else, Qatar, U.S. and Europe and the U.S. market, things like that. So I think that's a change. It's becoming a little less of a pure global business. There is different pricing in the let's say in the Russian sphere and than there is in the West at this point. And China is really starting to develop its own helium ecosystem. By that I mean you now have three Chinese companies that are building 11,000 gallon containers. That's a big change, but it could dramatically increase the availability of containers. I mean, for sure, I want to mention that these new manufacturers have a ways to go to prove that their containers are a similar level to Gardner containers or Linde containers, and that may take some time. But they're building containers and they're receiving orders, so that's one thing. There are also Chinese companies that are developing, offering helium extraction, purification, liquefaction capability, and there are domestic Chinese production, while it's still low, small, but there is activity. There is, growing domestic production in China. So I think that's, part of this whole thing. I guess, the last thing I'd mention is just that it's going to be, I mentioned that there's close to 60 helium exploration startups now, and more than 20 that are publicly traded companies. So that's an entirely different world than I grew up on in this business. It's a little bit like the Wild West when it comes to this kind of stuff. Um, what I would just say is that it's going to be interesting to see. There aren't going to be 60 helium exploration companies around 3 years from now or 5 years from now, and I doubt there will be 30 either. Many of these companies are never going to produce any helium, but some of them will succeed. The ones who have better access to capital and a better management team and a better business plan can certainly be very successful, even in an environment where there's oversupply, because they can be profitable at prices that are considerably lower than where prices have been recently. But it will be, let's say, more challenging for them to raise money and things like that in an environment where the shortage is over. Pricing is not going to be their friend, because it will be, probably trending down, and it'll be more challenging. So, I just think uh, it's going to be an interesting thing to watch, see how this plays out, see who the winners are, and see which companies fall by the wayside.